I think people get fascinated when they think just like straight up the truth is willfully not being told. And they're like, even I can see that there's something afoot here. And it's like, if you're the kids on that campus, there's some fucking murderer running around who got away with killing 4 people a month ago. I would personally be quite alarmed.
And welcome back. Alyssa, we've talked about true crime on this podcast before, and we all feel mixed about it. But we cannot yet resist the urge to dive down rabbit holes every once in a while when certain things happen that grab the national attention. Everyone's got a little Nancy Grace in them, you know?
Everyone has a little Nancy Grace, a little Nancy Drew, especially when you send me Reddit links that I can't escape from because I get drawn so deeply into them.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really excited that we have the panel we have today because, well, first of all, we have a really special guest. And second of all, we've got a really special regular person on the panel. Our first panelist is a comedian, writer, and the creator of Sundance TV AMC Plus's show, True Crime Story Indefensible, where she travels the country to dissect the mess that is the U.S. justice system. Her stand-up special, Lady Killer, is on Peacock right now, and you can pre-order her book, Not Funny, Essays on Life, Comedy, Culture, etc., which is coming out in April 2023. Jena Friedman, welcome to Hysteria.
Thank you for having me.
Congrats on your family, first of all, before we get to talking about murder. Congrats on how's everything going?
I mean, it's a lot. But it's good. He's healthy. That's all that matters.
That's great. Our next panelist is performing at Jimmy Kimmel's Comedy Club in Las Vegas on January 8th. You know her, you love her. It's Megan Gailey. Megan.
Hi. Have we ever had a more tired Hysteria panel? Between wow. Combined sleep in this crew right now, probably not reaching 12 hours.
I would say between the 4 of us, we've had a healthy 8-hour night of sleep.
Okay, great.
The 4 of us.
And let's be honest, I picked up most of that 8 hours for all of you guys.
You're doing the work, but you're a mama too to your sweet cats, and who knows what they're doing at your house.
They're making biscuits in my face at 2 a.m.
We're all very tired, but we're going to make the best of this panel. Jena, I want to start with you. Congratulations on True Crime Story Indefensible. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how the idea came to you?
So I was actually doing a stand-up set on Conan, making fun of the true crime industrial complex. And AMC reached out to me and a couple other comedians, and they were thinking of launching this franchise, which is now called True Crime Story. And they wanted to see if I could make true crime funny. And my first instinct was no. But then the pandemic happened and I lost 6 months of touring, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to give it a whirl. And so they gave us a little bit of development money, which is kind of unheard of. Like, this is a show I never would have been able to sell myself. It just kind of came about because the network wanted to do it. And they partnered me with Left Right Productions, and we created a pilot presentation. And we really hit a home run with that because it was about the murder of Alana Steinberg, who was stabbed in her sleep by her husband. He got away with it. And his defense brought in this legendary expert witness called his name is Martin Blinder, and he's most known for the Twinkie defense, which in the assassination of Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone in San Francisco, they brought in this expert witness who said that Dan White, the guy who killed them, had eaten too many Twinkies in the weeks leading up to the trial, and that impaired his judgment. And the jury bought it. And so this guy is like an expert witness for hire. And I sat down with him and I interviewed him. And it was really awful, but also my comedy comes from, a lot of it is kind of confrontational and messing with people a little bit. From my work at The Daily Show as a producer for Field Pieces. Anyway, this is a very long-winded way of answering your question. But we were able to kind of find a format where it wasn't LOL, but there was humor in us confronting people who perpetuate injustice. So that's kind of where I don't like to say comedy when I'm talking about true crime, because, or at least the show that we're doing, because you actually meet with victims and their victims' families. And it's really intense. But so far, we've gotten really great feedback. And again, the comedy comes from us confronting people that they were maybe unable to confront, or it provides a little bit of a catharsis because it's not just traditional true crime. It's like, how does this keep happening and what can we do about it? And that's what motivates us, sitting down with like a defense attorney who gets a guy off from murdering a woman with a crazy defense, or a prosecutor who doesn't see defendants as victims as well, or Dr. Martin Blinder, an expert witness who just is blinded by his misogyny and juries somehow by his testimony. So that's, I know it doesn't sound funny, but that's kind of where the humor comes from.
I watched the Casey Anthony episode and I thought it was great. Did you have a favorite episode out of the season?
So we've done 12 episodes in total. I think my favorite one is episode 2. It's about consent defenses, or like the rough sex defense as it's called. And that's something that I really wanted to I don't want to say tackle, because I'm like, why are we so violent as a culture? But that's something that I really have wanted to beat the shit out of for a really long time. And we had access to the granddaughter of the victim, and she is studying true crime. She's studying criminology herself, and she was incredible in the episode. And we got access to the defense attorney who got the killer off. And that, I mean, I'll spoil it, but the episode, basically the defense attorney can convince the jury that a woman choked on this guy's dick. And there might not have even been a sex act involved, but she was this like self-made immigrant woman, and she was murdered by this guy who stayed with the body for 3 days, and he undoubtedly murdered her, and he got away with it. And he's dating now in Florida, and his defense attorney did a really good job, and it was a really challenging episode because it's like, how do you cover this without making it a commercial for the defense attorney? How do you take back this person's story? Like, her whole family was in shock by her murder, but then on top of it, she was slut-shamed by the media. So it had all these elements of just kind of trying to give the granddaughter a voice and take back a narrative that was totally lost by the murder and then the subsequent media coverage of it. So that to me was like the sweet spot of the show. And also, consent offenses are outlawed in parts of the UK, but they still exist here. So if enough people like give a shit, we could try to write legislation or that outlaws that defense, because at the end of the day, no one during a sex act consents to die that way. And it's really hard to accidentally strangle someone. We talked to a medical examiner in that episode who really like told us how hard it was in a way that wasn't like giving killers tips. But so that to me was my favorite. The Casey Anthony episode was really, I don't want to say fun, but you're so far removed from that actual crime. And there was so much about it that I don't think we covered as a culture, which was really like a media fixation on it. So that was like the fun part. And I think like with our show, it's not traditional true crime. The first act is, okay, you guys want true crime, so we're going to use that as a Trojan horse to talk about larger systemic injustices. So that's kind of like how I convince myself what I'm doing is not ethically murky. You know, we get consent from the victims' families. We make it less about the actual case and more about the systemic injustice. And I've had like women who have like, you know, Trump on their Twitter handle retweeting the show. And I've never thought I could reach those people, but I do think that true crime can be kind of like a touch point where it's like, if you care about violence against women, maybe you won't vote for men who beat their wives. I think that you can connect to people across political divides with murder of women and men.
Yeah, I find the point you're bringing up about true crime being a way to talk about systemic injustice is really interesting, because it goes well with the specific instance that I wanted to get into with our panel today, which is the quadruple homicide and in Moscow, Idaho, where 4 college students, Xander Kanoodle, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Madison Mogen were all found stabbed to death in their house on November 13th. It's now a month later. The police have no suspects. There's a ton of like online sleuthing going on. And one thing that I found is interesting about this case that I don't think you would have seen maybe 5 years ago is a lot of the chatter among like online sleuths and even on like true crime podcasters and true crime pundits going on like HLN and talking about it or whatever, is people are saying like, hey, maybe the police aren't very good at this. And I don't think that that's something that like you would have seen before. Jena, what has been your, like, have you been keeping up with the case? Have you been keeping up with the way people are talking about it? And what's your take?
Well, I think we also, there's a distinction between crime, right? And true crime. True crime feels like it's this, like glossing over actual series of events for public consumption, right? Mm-hmm. Could we? So I haven't been following that case actually at all. I'm burnt. I'm a little burnt out on murder. I'm also burnt out on true crime. But to your point, I do think, you know, there are a lot of criticisms of the genre. And there are a lot of reasons I think it's criticized. Like, is true crime criticized more than football, which also is problematic in so many ways? Is it because it's like a predominantly female genre? Is true crime criticized for all the reasons that are valid? Yes, it should be. But one cool thing about it is that it is, I don't want to say waking people up, but it is giving people an understanding of the criminal legal system and a counterbalance to propaganda that I think is a net positive for our society. For a case like this to not have any leads, yeah, I think it's making it obvious that maybe the cops don't do everything Law and Order says they do.
Yeah, it's funny, like in a lot of true crime stories, they'll depict the serial killer as like, oh, he was a genius. And it's like, no, he was just like slightly smarter than the cops. Mm-hmm. You know, like he wasn't, was he a genius? Megan, have you been following this case? And do you have any thoughts on it?
I really end up kind of tapping out on these things because I get so afraid. I'm afraid of horror. I was like raised in the era of chain emails where it's like, if you see a red car at a gas station, you're going to die. You know, so like, I think whatever the version of true crime was in the 90s and the aughts really frightened me. And that's probably some bit on my mother and Dateline. When you have a kid, you have the capacity for only so much. And true crime was probably one of the first things off the plate because it just was like, oh, the world is too fucking scary. And like, I can't consume this as fun while also breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. I will say, like, Naomi and I get to watch an insane amount of Lifetime movies. And some of them are ripped from the headlines, but all of them across genre are ACAB. Like, in them, the cops do nothing. And it's like very obvious who the killer is, what they're doing, what their plan is. And it is never a cop ever solving the crime. And I think situations like Michelle McNamara and these people that have been able to not be detectives and not be within the police force help solve crimes is giving power, and some of it not great and some of it great, to outside people across the world too. There was a documentary during the Must Love Cats, or like that blew up. Like,
don't fuck with cats.
Yeah, like we see these cases where people on the internet solve them, and it is because cops are stupid most of the time.
Alyssa is holding up a cat.
Yes.
This is an audio medium, but Alyssa is currently holding up a cat. Nobody loves true crime more than cats. I think a cat would walk through a crime scene and be like, I didn't see anything, and just fade me. Alyssa, what are your thoughts on the homicide in Idaho and why it has become such a focus of national attention?
Okay. Well, one, obviously, 4 white kids, national attention. But it's also just beyond, like, to what Jena and Megan were saying, like, you guys, how are there no fucking leads at this point? I mean, now you've got, like this isn't, it's interesting because when you think about it, you're like, well, if it happened in New York City, would they have leads by now? Because there are cameras everywhere. And it's like this, because I went down the Reddit on this, I was like looking at the sleuths, you know, the online criminal hunters. And I was just like, fuck yeah, that's a great point they make. Fuck yeah. Like, why aren't the cops? How have they not? Like one of the things they're like, well, yeah, there were, like, we found out. I think people get fascinated when they think just like straight up the truth is willfully not being told. And they're like, even I can see that there's something afoot here. And I think in this case in particular, it's like, been a month. There were just so many facts that were not even remotely disclosed. Like, there were other roommates in the house. The roommates came home before the people were murdered. Like, the roommates got home at 1. They said the time of death was around 1:45. I mean, there were so many. And as I went down, I don't know if these people were talking truth or not, but I was like still into these sleuths who had clearly done so much work. I am fascinated by it. Before, I had really not even heard about it. But then it's like the longer it went, I was like, wait a minute, what? They still haven't found anybody? But it's not even that. There's zero leads. They didn't take their cars into custody for like weeks. Like, what the fuck? I know it snowed out there, but they got tow trucks. So I think that, you know, part of it now is people are like, who's going to solve it? Because nobody thinks the cops are on their shit with this one. And, you know, especially because when the internet sleuths have come up with options that the cops have been confronted by, where reporters are like, well, how about this? They're like, we have no information at this time. And if they have a lead, they're like, we have no leads at this time. So I think that it's people being like, I can do your job better. Watch me. And I think that's kind of the vibe.
Alyssa, out of pure curiosity, do you think the cops are covering something up, or do you think it's incompetence?
I think it's incompetence. I don't feel like they're covering up for anybody. It feels like, you know what the truth is? I feel like if they were covering up for somebody, they'd actually have more nuanced, like they'd have answers, you know, because they'd know where the clues were going to lead. So they could reverse engineer sort of if that's what they were doing. But this is just like, nope, folks, we'll let you know when we have something. And it's like, if you're the kids on that campus, there's some fucking murderer running around who got away with killing 4 people a month ago. I would personally be quite alarmed.
Yeah, the parents of kids who are still on that campus. I mean,
a lot of them left, actually.
I would too.
Of them left and are taking finishing out the term remotely, and it's really strange. It's a weird story. I feel like the people online are getting involved. Whatever is at the root of them wanting to be involved comes from a good place, like they want to help.
There are worse things you could do on an online message board. So being a true crime sleuth is pretty amazing.
Jena, I wonder if, and when you were making your show and like prepping for it, if you got to talk to people that were like online sleuths or people who had helped solve crimes or anything like that. And if you didn't, then like, why did you make that decision?
We haven't done an episode. I think that there's a valid episode to the phenomenon of online sleuthing. We haven't done an episode on that. And so we really have just been like, our processes. I find a story with the team that feels like there's been an injustice, talk to the family, and then you branch out from there. So the internet peanut gallery hasn't really been a part of the process of making the show yet.
Is there any story that you wanted to cover in making the show that you didn't get to yet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I can say or not, but I definitely wanted, well, I don't know if I should say it. Yeah.
Are you going to kill someone, Jena, and then reverse engineer the show?
No, I mean, I think I wanted to cover the rape cops. It's really not the right term, but in New York City, I was living in the East Village in 2011 when these 2 police officers took turns like either watching and raping a woman. And then when you just kind of zoom out, you can like sexual assault among police is really endemic. And I wanted to touch on that. And I think that that's still on the table to do a story about that. But I our lead in is Law and Order. So, you know, with a show like ours, there's so much that we get away with. That was in season 1 that I really wanted to do that. But I mean, to the credit of the network, I really like, we got a jokey fetus lawyer sketch on this season. And I mean, they weren't signing up for like actual comedy when they greenlit the show, and that they've been incredibly cool and receptive. And the fact that I could even like do a story about abortion, about the criminalization of pregnant people, it was cool. So they've given us a lot more leeway than I expected, but I think and it's changing now. I think that with everything going on, anyone working in this space or greenlighting shows in this space has broadened their horizon for what they will accept as content. But I think that there's, a hesitancy among network executives to kind of criticize law enforcement.
Yeah. And also, Jena, you were like pregnant when you were filming part of the show. Like
I was so pregnant. The last episode I'm crowning. Like my child should be in SAG.
How was that like experience? Because also like, Megan and I both have kids also, and it just like scrambles your brain and like, and I'm not saying like, ooh, mommy brain or whatever, but there are like physical structural changes that happen to your brain and your amygdala and fear. You process fear more differently. So how were the changes that you were undergoing as a pregnant person impacting the way that you confronted these stories?
So the first 6 are very dark and they're horrifying. And I sat down for hours with victims' families and talked to people who hadn't necessarily processed their trauma. In one case, the woman was murdered like a couple years ago, like 2018 or 2018. So it was really, really heavy. So when I found out I was pregnant, I just kind of didn't want to do stories that dark because just too much. I was like getting like secondary trauma from those interviews. So that was one thing. But I was actually surprised. I had a pretty easy pregnancy, and the amount of work, like I was literally shooting when I was 36 weeks pregnant. The amount of work you can get done. And I also directed the series. So I was in the edit, working with the editors, directing, shooting, producing, hosting towards the end of my pregnancy. And I think that, I before I got pregnant, I didn't know that was possible. So I think when you're pregnant, you can still work. We can still work. And we should be allowed to work, and we should be given opportunities. The post-pregnancy is where all the shit hits the fan. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to work again. He's crying all the time and only sleeps when I'm holding him.
Oh, no. I also wonder, too, if people felt like... the most fun I've ever had doing stand-up was when I was pregnant, because I would walk out huge and people were like, what is going on? Like, this is insane.
I saw you do that set at the Virgil. It was so funny. Yes, it's a great prop. I mean, you can get away with, especially like in the field too. It's like, if you don't answer my question, you're going to stress out the baby.
Right. Like, it's very disarming, especially for, I think, men that pride themselves on the virtue of life, to be like, I'm here in front of you and like, you are gonna have to talk to me right now. And they almost, I think it challenges sort of their concept of, are they the most important person on earth, actually?
Yeah.
I mean, I felt very vulnerable when I was pregnant, like, and because isn't like murder the leading cause of death?
Well, one of the leading causes of death among pregnant women is homicide. Yes. I found that out at like 7 months when I was like, what are we going to cover for our 6th episode or whatever? Yes, I felt vulnerable too. It's weird. There's like this vulnerability, like just walking down the street. I was like, is someone going to just jump out of a bush and stab me? And then that's my neuroses. But then there's also, to your point, Megan, this like power that you do have in very specific ways.
I mean, I always felt like a character in a movie about a crime, where it's like, if you see a pregnant character and she's married to a cop, either she or the person she's married, someone's going to die someone involved in that pregnancy is going to die. And there's something and also like, I wasn't worried about someone coming out and like stabbing me. I was worried about someone just like bumping up against me and me falling down, like, because it's
getting pushed.
Yeah, like it's such an awkward time, and like I sometimes can enjoy true crime that's like older than 15, 20 years old, because then it feels like maybe, I don't know, for whatever reason, that's just like the moral line that I feel okay engaging with. I guess maybe like prior to 1990. If it's like in the 90s, it feels anyway. But like when I was pregnant, I found, because I felt so vulnerable, that thinking of, and I felt so like empathetic, I found it really hard for me to like think too hard about violence and cruelty, because it like upset me like really, really deeply. And I wonder, I mean, Jena, like the fact that you were able to put this together when you were like in that physical state is like pretty amazing to me.
There's like a super cut we need to make that we don't have, of just the outtakes in my first trimester when I'm like reading police reports, people having like semen found in different orifices, and I'm just like gagging profusely.
Oh God.
Trying not to. And then I was like worried that my son was going to be a serial killer because he's listening to me like edit like blah, 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 was stabbed 26 times, and it comforts him. So we started watching me and the fetus. Oh my God. No, I started watching Murder, She Wrote while I was pregnant, just so he would have some because I feel like that's like so calming. Jessica Fletcher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Injustice.
Yeah. Alyssa, like, are you someone who engages with like true crime usually, or do you just kind of get sucked into rabbit holes when I send you links to things?
I've watched more Law and Order than the average bear. I mean, when I met Mariska Hargitay and asked her about an episode, she's like, I don't remember that. She's like, you do, but I don't remember that. No, you know what? I found it specifically, and I know I stipulate that there are a lot of problematic things about these shows, but I found that I learned things. Like I found them as useful tools in some ways. Like, how can I help protect myself? What should I, like what kind of people to avoid? What kind of, never go to a sex party in the West Village. But no, I also found that like, I really got into them during the Trump administration, because I found that it was like the only place where there was some modicum of justice sometimes. And that was just like that was like a real thing. I felt like I was watching so much stuff go unanswered, publicly, that, the best I could do was watch some crimes get solved by Emmy Award winning actors and actresses.
Do you think that like true crime, and specifically the cases that become like Nancy Grace-ified, contribute to white women's idea that they are kind of like at the center of the universe?
Oh, totally. My true crime was my fascination with so many Lifetime movies before, which weren't really true crime. They were just crimes against women who wore shoes that were improbably, not going to get them away from whoever they were running from. But no, of course, it's like, look what could happen to us, and it's really, we're not the issue. And so, yeah.
Jena, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the cases that people tend to fixate on contribute to like a sense of an overinflated sense that we as white women are like the targets of crime?
I mean, I think all media and media representation impacts how we view the world. That's my politician answer. On the outline, we talked about like Gabby Petito's case. That was a really interesting one in that it touched on like all the kind of social media influencer, white woman, blah, 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 blah. And it captivated the public's imagination. I mean, in our show, we have episodes where we try to specifically call that out and focus on other stories. And I think the danger when you do center particularly true crime on white women is that when other women go missing and are murdered, their stories get less attention, they're taken less seriously, and like you see in statistics. I think now, because everyone has a microphone and everyone's on social media, we're able to, I keep saying tackle, I don't know why, but like the blind spots in the criminal legal system and in our ability to, give certain people justice while perpetuating injustice for other people. And, we can segue to Gwen Eichel's missing white women syndrome, which is a definite documented phenomenon. And, again, you can tell by the statistics of whose crimes get solved and whose crimes go unsolved. And it's typically, white women. But not to say that, it's tricky because we're talking about like, oh, white women and we center ourselves, but we also do get murdered, and so it's like two women are murdered. One's murderer might, her crime might get solved, whereas another woman who's not white, her crime may never get solved. It's still injustice, and and you want to level the playing field, but you also want women in general to not be murdered, nor men to get murdered. So it's a tricky conversation to have.
Right. Totally. And I was thinking about you saying that you would get like email forwards that were like, watch out for the red car or like whatever. I found that on social media right now, there's a lot of, and by social media, I mean like Facebook. I mean like didn't leave the home state, whatever. Like every week I see something that's like, this is a sign that you're about to get trafficked.
Yes, I saw one on TikTok yesterday that was like, if there's a tissue underneath the handle of your car. And I'm like, what? There's so much I get. This is what this woman on TikTok was saying, and she seemed cool. She was like, I'm at this gas station. It's always a gas station.
Oh, it's always Target for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's a gas station. And like, they're not even talking to me. They're like, you're 36. No one's taking you. But she's like, there's a tissue. They put like substances on the tissue. And so when you touch them and then touch your face, it causes you to
Is Vladimir Putin trying to traffic people?
What is happening?
Yeah. I see that a lot. And it's sort of, I find it kind of like irksome because like, why would you get like what kind of an idiot trafficker would target a person who is most likely to launch like a nationwide search for you? Like it just seems
but they don't a lot. I mean, it's a lot of women of color like disproportionately so are victims of crimes like that because they like the killers know that they can get away with it because there just isn't the same national outcry. I've seen the TikTok videos too, and they're just for a younger generation.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's. I remember there was a girl who went missing at an NBA game. Like a 15-year-old went to the bathroom, was like there with her dad, and then left with a guy, and he had his like arm draped around her, and there was footage of that, and it's like, what is like. Did she know him? Like, was he an older boyfriend who was going to traffic her and she didn't know? Like, it's like that there's a lot of blanks and I guess the internet sleuths, and I haven't circled back. It's like, I'm one of those people where I'm like, what? And then I'm like, oh, is she okay? I don't know. I hope she is.
Maybe the algorithm will serve you up a video with an update now that you've been talking about it.
Golly, I hope she's okay. I think it was a Mavericks game. Mark Cuban, we need an update.
Well,
it was a Mavericks game. Sorry.
Yeah.
I had to Google.
It's like, I remember the team.
Is she okay? Is she okay?
You guys, I hate to tell you, but the updates end June 18th.
Yeah. Okay, that's why I don't have an update, because they didn't give me an update.
She was found 10 days later, sold for sex in an Oklahoma hotel. But she was found. You're welcome.
The impression of trafficking is that it is something that disproportionately impacts people who are on the societal fringes, and a lot of times people being trafficked are not being trafficked for sex. They're being trafficked for like labor, like farm labor. So most of the trafficking victims in the U.S. are actually men being trafficked for their for labor, not for sex.
That was also a Law and Order episode.
Yeah.
And I don't know too, it's like, did I believe the Wayfair was trafficking for 30 minutes? I did. When they were like, this desk is actually the name of a girl.
Lucinda.
They got me for 30 minutes. And then I was like, I don't think that's what's going on. So it's like, I think trafficking is one of those real like headline grabbers.
Yeah.
That I have heard people say like the stats don't back up that it's as big of a problem as we are led to believe.
Sorry, I just have to interject one last bit here, and I'm going to send this to the group. But parents report cops were of little to no help. They wouldn't post her on they wouldn't enter into the missing persons database. And it was ultimately a Houston-based anti-trafficking organization that successfully located the missing teenager by getting online and going to like
advertisements.
Right. They found her via advertisement.
And I think the parents, like 2 days after, saw a photo of her like in a hotel. I do remember that.
So anyway, but she was found. So that's good.
Is it the cops just don't want to work? I feel like they just hate working.
I think they just want tanks and then are like, oh, do we have computers? Like they just seem like they bought the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
Too.
You guys, should I become an internet sleuth? I think I'd be good.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that
from like your cabin and
years
upstate.
from now, Jenna's gonna have me on her podcast to be like, and here, breaking news, internet sleuth.